Hi everyone. So it's December again, and as you can see, we're back here on the Windows PC. I've been working quite a bit on this. I meant for this to be a shorter video, just kind of like a short on, hey, there's this thing called M-86 out there. And it's kind of the basis for what became DOS. Well, rather, CP/M is. The CP/M for the 8080 is primarily what they based the operating system that would become DOS off of. And since it's December, I thought it would be neat to try to install CP/M-86 on a thin client. And it was not trivial. I wound up trying multiple things, had some success booting off of a thumb drive up on the client with multiple versions of CP/M. Managed to get it to boot CP/M 1.1 and load some tools. There's a tool called CCV, which basically allows you to essentially create a logical volume inside of a partition with CP/M. And then there's another tool here that allows you to make that partition bootable. And you run into all the same problems you run into for DOS 622 with a floppy disk emulated on a thumb drive. You have this big hard disk shows up in the partitioning utility, and the tool for making CP/M bootable only works on the primary disk, and since you're booting up off of the USB stick, it shows up as the primary disk. Just like in DOS, you have problems partitioning. Only problem is this is CP/M-86. It was written in 1980. There was one partitioning tool, and no one ever made another one. So we kind of have to do some backdoor things to make it work. There's also this support for high-capacity floppy drives. That's the other issue. CP/M doesn't natively support 1.44 megabyte floppy drives, so we have to have a tool for working with those. So I managed on the unofficial CP/M website. They have archived a lot of versions of CP/M, and under the binaries you can find a CP/M 1.1 bootable floppy for 1.44 megabyte floppies, and this is how we create the image that we can try to put on a USB stick. I even went and I tried making a CD that does basically the same thing, and I got garbage on the screen. Like, it wasn't accepting the emulation, and I tried several different methods of putting a floppy disk onto a CD. I wasted about 4 blank CDs trying that out, and it just didn't work. So I got stuck, and then that's when I bought this guy. It's essentially it's a USB card edge that plugs into the back of a floppy drive, and I managed to use that to create a boot disk for CP/M, and that's actually how we're able to load it directly onto a thin client. But I thought I'd show you on the virtual machine, because that's where this has to start. because a lot of the tools for making that floppy and adding the hard drive partitioning tools to the floppy are not, they don't really work in DOS on the thin client, so you have to start on a virtual machine. Okay, so we're gonna set up CP/M on a thin client, but first we have to prepare the disks. And we're going to start off by installing a tool called 22disk. It's going to allow us to modify CP/M disk images through the VirtualBox, because even though we have the ability to read disks in USB, the tools for creating disks do not work through the USB port on the thin client. So first thing we're going to do is we've copied the installation files, and I'll link the source in the description to the thumbstick, and we've just set up DOS exactly like we did in the last video to read from a USB stick. So we're going to go, and first thing we're going to do is 22dinst, which will install the tool, and we're going to tell it is in D, and we are going to tell it C is the destination, and we're going to tell it 22disk for the name of the directory, and it created it, and then you press any key to continue. Yes, we have an IBM PCAT. Yes. No. Alright, then it copies the files. Any key to return to DOS. Go to C. Alright, there it is, 22disk. Alright, so now by default this is set up to not read the 1.44 megabyte disks we're going to use. This is not a problem because in the initial disk creator that I'll show you in just a second, there is a definition for 22disk. So we just copy that. M-86 C. Okay, so we just do gen index 144 CP/M-86 to CP/M Alright, and then now it's set up to use those disks. So now what we're going to do is there is another tool that lets us create a disk. So we're going to put a blank disk into the drive by doing create new floppy, and we are going to name it new. You can call it whatever you like. That's just, it has to be a unique file name that you've never used before, or you'll get an error. Alright, so now we have a blank formatted floppy. I think it's important that it's formatted. I haven't actually tried it with an unformatted floppy. So then switch to the directory with the tool, and we type make disk. It's another Cydex tool called copyqm, which makes byte for byte copies of CP/M disks. In this case, it is going to create a 1.44 meg disk for us that is bootable, containing the CP/M 1.1 operating system. All right, all copies are done. Press escape. 10 to exit. Okay, so we go to 22 disk. And you'll notice that at the bottom there, nothing is set up yet. So we got to set the diskette type. 1, enter for a list. The only one on the list now is the 1.44 meg. And then we have to set the drive, which is 2. We're going to put an A colon. All right, now to test it, to make sure it's working, we can pull up a directory, and those are the files on the CP/M disk. So next thing we're going to do is copy DOS files to CP/M, which is 4. Star. And it's going to copy all those hard drive preparation files. And then we're going to do it again. Oops. All right, and all of those are copied. And then we can go ahead again and display the directory. And there it is. All right, so now we've got a completely ready to go CP/M floppy disk. So now what we have to do is use that disk to create a virtual machine, because we have to create floppy disk images for the other software we're going to install. So I'll show you how to do one of those. I've done several. So here's what we'll do. We'll go close this out. All right, so we're gonna create a new system. And you gotta tell it other and DOS, and then click next and go through all of this here. Create virtual hard disk, click next, fix size, next. Doesn't have to be too terribly big. And then enable USB, and you're going to go ahead and you are going to, oh, we don't have to do that. Okay, so then once you've done that, you go to storage and you pick the floppy disk that we just set up. And we click OK and start, and it should just boot into CP/M on a new virtual box. There we go. So we can go to a full screen. Make it easier to see. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is prepare the hard drive. So cvv prep. And it's showing us there are no partitions. So that's a problem because we need partitions. So what we'll do is we will choose the floppy disk we created when we put DOS on a thin client, and we will reboot. Oops. we can use this new tool I found in between making that video and now, called xfdisk, and it's just an extended fdisk program, and all CVV is looking for is a partition. It absolutely does not have to be formatted. It's just looking for a partition. So we'll make a DOS partition. And then we will pick our disk for CPM and reset. CVV prep. Pick partition 1. Type C. All right, so now it's formatted. Next thing we'll have to do is go into setup. And we have to enable some field install device driver memory. So that's F5. And if I remember correctly, it requires 7K. That's all we need. 9 and F9 again. And then we have to 3-finger salute to reboot. Now we can do CVV, which will assign the drive letters. Okay, so now all the drive letters are assigned. Virtual volumes, 8 megabytes in size. Now we're going to run the CVV make program, which will copy everything over to the boot partition so that we can actually boot to CPM. Then we just use the CPM copy command pip to copy everything from A to the B drive. So you go B equals star dot star, and that will copy everything over to the B drive so that there's the B drive. Now we can actually go ahead and switch the disk out to something new. Let's call it Zork, because we're gonna make some we're gonna copy the files for Zork and some other demos over to the disk. You go 144 prep A, and you press enter, and now that floppy disk is formatted. Go to B and you do stat. It'll show us we have 1.4K available on that disk, which is just great. All right, so the last thing we need to do is go to our CPM disk, put it back in, and run a program called, we're going to run the CVV make boot again, only we're going to use the S tag, and what that will do is copy the setup file over to the hard drive, so that you can have your clock and all the other things that boot up automatically. It's the only way to set that up with this particular virtual volumes manager. Alright, so that's all done. We are going to pull out that floppy, and we are going to shut down. And we're going to go back into our MS-DOS machine. So what we'll do is go back to C, and we'll copy Zork over to that disk image. Floppy's already in the drive. Copy DOS files to CPM. Oh, Floppy's not already in the drive. There we go. All right, so those are all copied. All right. So that's pretty much copying files over to the disks, getting them ready to go. The next step will be hooking up the USB floppy drive to the client and installing the operating system. Okay, so first thing you need to do when you're going to put it on the client is you have to copy all the media over to a floppy disk. So I'll show you how to do it once. This is what I use. This is a regular 1.44 megabyte floppy drive with an adapter to USB. It's got this little card edge connector that sits in there, and it hooks up to USB. The tool I use is DiskWrite, and I'll link it in the description. There's a lot of reasons why you want to use an external tool versus trying to make the disk in a virtual machine. I run into a lot of problems and glitches when I do that. The emulation is not perfect. It's good enough to make the images, but beyond that, you run into problems. So you're going to want to make sure that everything that could access the floppy drive is closed because it could cause an issue. You're going to want to make sure that you unconditionally formatted the floppy using an unconditional format, which is basically just going into the format tool and unclicking quick format and formatting it. You run into problems with these particular types of images if you don't format the disk beforehand for DOS. You just have to make sure that it can successfully format, because if there's a bad sector or there's a problem with it, it won't work. So then what we do is once we open the tool, we pick our image. I'm going to do this one, but you could just as well do the one you created as your boot disk. And then you click Write. It's actually a pretty fast floppy disk imaging program. I think it writes a whole track at a time, which makes it really, really fast. Whatever the largest chunk of the disk that it can write at a time. It's definitely faster than an unconditional format. All right, and it'll run to the end. It will not tell you it's finished. When it stops writing, you click exit, and it makes some noise. That's pretty much it. When I move the drive, I always take the disk out because I don't want the head to damage the disk. All these disks are very old, so it's just an extra precaution. So then we switch over to the thin client and we do the actual install. So what we have done here is we have repartitioned the hard drive to make space for CPM. Basically what that involves is just going into fdisk and deleting both partitions, and then you create a partition, but you only create it large enough. You just do a primary partition. You only create it large enough so that there is space for what you need in the operating system. In this case, I made it 37 megabytes. And the reason I did that was the virtual partitions that are created by the CPM CVV tool are 8 megabytes in size, so that should give me 3 virtual drives. Really, the partition tool only cares that the partition is a partition. So again, all we have to do is just create an extended partition, 24 megabytes. We don't actually have to make drives in there because it's going to erase all of that. I do, but I don't format it. And then it restarts. And that was just the regular MS-DOS partitioning tool. So then what you're going to do is you put the USB floppy drive in there. Put your disk in. Put your disk into the drive. And do your reboot. That boots CPM from Floppy. All right. So there's CPM. And it's just, again, like we did. We're going to go ahead and we are going to prepare the disk. So we need to do CVV prep. And you see that our second partition is right there. We pick 2. It says, warning, we're going to erase everything. Yep, we know. All right. We're going to go into setup and make sure that we still have 7K of field memory, and we do. So the next thing we're going to do is, now that the partition is prepared, we run the CVV tool. And that makes all 3 of those volumes available for use. And then we run CVV MKVO. And it makes it bootable. Then what we can do is just use the pip command, which is kind of like a copy command. We're going to want to do drive B because that's the first partition. Equals star.star. I just think it's kind of fun with the floppy drive. All these noises are very nostalgic. Memories of installing Slackware on my 486 using one of these floppies that we downloaded off of BBS. We had to make all those floppy disks. I think we actually downloaded those floppies using a 2400 baud modem initially, till we got a 14.4, and then that was slightly faster. Of course, all on dial-up. All right, so now we have all the system files on B. We're we're going to leave the bootable partition, the DOS, and we can verify that with the setboot command. Right now, partition 1 is active, and we want to leave it that way because we're going to go in and install a boot manager. So next, we want to be able to do something with CP/M. So we're going to install some software, and we will install Turbo Pascal. So, and we'll put that on the C drive. And it's just as simple as copying it. So pip C equals star dot star. Oops. Huh. Fun fact, there is no path environment variable in CP/M. So if you want to use the pip command, you actually have to tell it where to look, which is the B drive in this case. We're going to put it on the C drive equal that 144 builder command is a remnant of the disk prep process. You can leave it or delete it. Hi everyone, Future Dave here. So I discovered the reason that Turbo Pascal setup didn't work was that I had copied the files incorrectly. So some people who work with Z80 kit computers know that there's this tool called CP/M tools. And I was opening the disk for Turbo Pascal in here and copying the files out so that I could use 22 disk to copy them back over. And that was a mistake. Apparently it did something to the binaries. One of two things: either I used the wrong format, or I used, or the files got corrupted when they were being transferred. It's unclear to me. I didn't really look into it. But what I figured out to do was, if you just use VirtualBox, you can put the Turbo Pascal disk, which is, I want to say, a 360K floppy image, in drive 1, and then you can create a new floppy. And you can just prep the disk for 1.44 use in CP/M, and then if you switch to A, where your 360K floppy is, you can just copy the files over to B, and that will work when you go ahead and write the image. So anyway, back to whatever it was I was saying. Then, now that we've got that installed, maybe we want some games. All right. So that's the games. All right, and the last thing we want to do is copy over the settings from the CPM boot disks. We put that back in the floppy drive. And then you go there we go. Then you can go ahead and take the floppy disk out. And then we're going to go ahead and reboot into DOS. All right, we're in DOS. So there's this tool, it's extended fdisk. What this is going to let us do is install a boot manager. So we can call this one DOS, and we can call this CPM. And now that the boot manager is installed, we press F3 to quit. Yes. All right. Restart. We should have a boot manager. And we should be able to boot back into CPM. Okay, so we're in CPM. What can we do? Well, we got games, for one. Somebody wrote a 8080 emulator. And basically what it lets you do is run binary files for CPM on CPM-86. But they're written for, the binary files would be written for the 8080. Oh, you gotta capitalize it. Huh. Yes. Also, we have little Tetris program. Oh, numlock. There we go. I think it's funny that this game was probably written for a much faster computer, and the timing just works. Maybe you want to use the VGA. First thing we should do I haven't actually tried this yet, but this is a slowdown tool. So cool little VGA plasma demo someone wrote. I have no idea who, nor do I know how to get out of it. So we'll reboot. But as you can see, pretty much this is a full CPM install on a modern thin client with a VIA Eden running at 800 megahertz. But it's only got available 640K, because that's all the more that CPM can look at a time. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed putting CPM on a thin client. There's a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. I thought this would be a short video. It turned out not to be. But I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Okay, I think I saved the files to the hard drive for doing this. Oh, it looks like I did not. Oh, that's okay. You can fix that through the magic of editing.